switching out of the 10th canto into the 11th canto. So we will jump into the 11th canto, first chapter and third verse. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All right, so go straight to the translation here. And the title is chaptered. I can see the title here. The Curse Upon the Yadu Dynasty. So translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead used the Yadu dynasty, which was protected by his own arms, to eliminate the kings who, with their armies, had been the burden of this earth. Then the unfathomable Lord thought to himself, although some may say that the earth's burden is now gone, in my opinion, it is not yet gone, because there still remains the Yadava dynasty itself, whose strength is unbearable for the earth. One more time. The Supreme Personality of Godhead used the Yadu dynasty, which was protected by his own arms, to eliminate the kings who with their armies had been the burden of this earth. Then the unfathomable Lord thought to himself, although some may say that the earth's burden is now gone, in my opinion, it is not yet gone, because there still remains the Yadava dynasty itself, whose strength is unbearable for the earth. Purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has remarked in this regard that although ordinary people might think that the Lord had now removed the burden of the earth by killing the demons, reestablishing Dharma, and so on, Lord Shri Krishna himself could detect that there was further danger from the irreligious activities of his own family members who were acting improperly. It is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam that a just king will refuse to punish his own enemy if his enemy is innocent, but will punish his own son if his son actually deserves punishment. Thus, although in the eyes of the world, the members of the Lord's own dynasty are always worshipful, Lord Krishna detected that by their intimate association with him, some members of the Yadu dynasty had become indifferent to his will. Since such whimsical members of the Yadu dynasty could act freely, being relatives of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they would surely cause great misfortune for the world, and foolish persons would take such whimsical behavior to be the will of Krishna. Thus, the Lord, whose desires are inconceivable, began to consider the need to annihilate the indifferent, contemptuous members of the Yadu family. From the viewpoint of ordinary persons, all the demons had been killed by the Supreme Lord's pastimes in Dwarka and Mathura, as well as by the battle of Kurukshetra, and the earth was now free of its burden. Nevertheless, to free the earth from the remaining burden of his own puffed up family members, Lord Shri Krishna transferred them away from the earth by causing a fratricidal quarrel among them. In this way, he prepared for his own disappearance from the earth. Sridhar Swami has pointed out that the word Bahubi, by his arms, is used in the plural rather than the dual to indicate that the Lord caused the destruction of the Yadu dynasty in his four-armed form. The original form of Krishna as Govinda is two-armed, but it is by the plenary portion of the four-armed Narayan that the Lord killed all the demons on the earth and ultimately removed the burdensome members of his own family. It may be asked, if certain members of the Yadu family had become indifferent to the will of the Lord, why didn't they oppose the Lord and his plan to remove them from the earth? Therefore, the word aprameya is used, which indicates that it is impossible for anyone, even the Lord's own family members, to understand his will completely. Srila Jiva Goswami has given another reason for the destruction of the Yadu dynasty. He emphasizes that the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead should never be taken to be ordinary material activities, nor are the Lord's associates ordinary persons. Although Lord Krishna apparently incarnates within this world for some time and then goes away, it should be understood that the Supreme Lord is eternally situated with his entourage in his various abodes in the spiritual sky, such as Sri Goloka, Mathura, and Dwarka. The members of the Yadu dynasty are eternal associates of the Lord, and therefore they cannot bear to be separated from the Lord. Since Krishna was preparing to give up his earthly pastimes, if he were to leave the Yadu dynasty on the earth, they would surely become so disturbed by his absence that in their highly agitated state of mind, they would trample and destroy the earth. Therefore, Krishna arranged the disappearance of the Yadu dynasty prior to his own disappearance. Srila Jiva Goswami concludes that ultimately the members of the Yadu dynasty were never to be considered irreligious. Vaishnavacharyas have mentioned that the story of the disappearance of the Yadu dynasty is especially meant to help the conditioned souls achieve liberation from the bondage of materialistic life. Within the three worlds, there were none as powerful and opulent as the Yadu dynasty. Supreme Personality of Godhead is the possessor of unlimited opulences, beauty, strength, knowledge, fame, and so on. And the members of the Yadu dynasty, being the personal associates of the Lord, were also endowed with inconceivable opulences. Therefore, when we see how a fratricidal war suddenly deprived the members of the Yadu dynasty of all their earthly possessions and even their lives, we can understand there's no permanent position within this material world. In other words, although the members of the Yadu dynasty are eternal associates of the Lord and were immediately transferred to another planet where their Lord was appearing, their sudden disappearance through fratricidal war is meant to impress upon the conditioned souls the temporary nature of this world. Therefore, the apparent indifference or enmity of certain members of the Yadu dynasty toward Krishna should not be taken to be actual irreligion on their part. The entire situation was arranged by Lord Krishna to teach a lesson to the conditioned souls. In this connection, Srila Jiva Goswami has cited several verses from the Bhagavatam to prove that the members of the Yadu dynasty achieved their exalted birth in the Lord's own family by innumerable pious activities and by complete absorption in the thought of Lord Krishna. In fact, it is said that in sleeping, sitting, walking, and speaking, they were unable to remember their own selves because they were simply thinking of Krishna. In the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada has commented as follows on the disappearance of the Yadu dynasty. This is 1.15.33. The setting of the sun does not mean the end of the sun. It means that the sun is out of our sight. Similarly, the end of the mission of the Lord on a particular planet or universe only means that he is out of our sight. The end of the Yadu dynasty also does not mean that it is annihilated. It disappears along with the Lord out of our sight. Okay. It's a wonderful verse and purport. I'll just do some invocation prayers and then we'll go into the verse and some thoughts that I wanted to share. And then we'll open it up for any comments and questions and discussion. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshutarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktabinda Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vancha kalpatarubhascha kripa sindhubhyo patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Okay, so thank you all for being here for our morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. The best way to start off our morning to hear the message of the Bhagavatam, Srila Shukadeva Goswami, this conversation with Maharaj Parikshit, um, very the deepest spiritual wisdom that we can find anywhere in this entire cosmic manifestation and beyond. Um, so this chapter, now we're moving, as we mentioned, from the 10th canto over to which is directly dealing with the pastimes of the Lord. And now, as the Lord's pastimes in this form of Krishna um, are ending on this planet 5,000 years ago. And so this chapter is kind of aptly titled, the beginning of the end for the Kuru dynasty, right, as we just mentioned. Um, and so when we think about this, you know, going back to the translation and the verse itself, um, I was thinking that before the curse that occurred, which we'll go into in this chapter, with the Yadu dynasty, when they're cursed by the Brahmanas and Krishna's son gets cursed, um, to kind of give birth to this iron club that eventually um, destroys the dynasty. The actual curse begins a little bit prior to this, which is actually at the end of the Mahabharata war. Um, when the war occurs between the Pandavas and Kauravas, at the end of the war, Maharaj Yudhishthir, along with his brothers and Krishna, they go and visit um, Gandhari and Dhritarashtra, were the parents. Dhritarashtra was the king, and were the parents of Duryodhana, who was really the kind of the mastermind behind this whole conflict between the Pandavas and Kauravas, which we all know the Pandavas and Kauravas was actually one family, right? Arjuna and Yudhishthira and Duryodhana were cousins, but there was this fratricidal conflict that occurred because because Duryodhana was very greedy to keep the kingdom for himself and not to give the Pandavas even 5 villages, so that they could be Kshatriyas and do their natural duty, which was leading and ruling, protecting Dharma. And when they go to visit Gandhari, which was the mother of Duryodhana, she had actually accrued a lot of pious um, activity, or kind of punya, from all the tapasya and all the disciplines that she had done in her life and all the sacrifices she had made. For example, she also blindfolded herself when she married the blind king Dhritarashtra. Um, Even though she had sight, she did that out of her duty and a sense of sacrifice, tapasya that was done. And so she had all this pious credit. So she actually, of course, as we know, the Pandavas were victorious, and the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra were killed, including Duryodhana. Um, and it's very difficult for a mother to see that, right? To bear that loss of seeing her children killed. And so she actually was very aggrieved and very much grieving and very angry, right? Within that, above that sadness, there was this deep anger and resentment of why did this conflict happen, even though she knew why the conflict happened. And we can see this is all just kind of part of the Lord's pastimes, if anything. Um, it is part of that. And so she actually curses Krishna, and when she sees him, even though she knows Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that all of this happened because of her sons and because of the plan of providence, she still curses them that just like I'm grieving for my children, and our family was destroyed by this conflict within our family, the Kaurava dynasty, because the Kaurava dynasty was so powerful that they were ruling the entire Bharatvarsha, um, and no one could really check them. They were incredibly powerful warriors and Kshatriyas, starting from Arjuna and Bhima to Bhishma, the grandfather, to Karna, who was the best friend of Duryodhana, to Dronacharya, to Kripacharya. There's so many incredible warriors on both sides, which are all part of the same dynasty. So that really there was no one that could stop him on the entire planet. But she said that I curse you that you will also feel this pain, that your dynasty, the Yadu dynasty, will also go through this fratricidal conflict, and you will feel the pain, and your family will feel the pain of losing its loved ones. And we can also see, and I'm gonna make a point here, how, and I have kind of 4 or 5 lessons and points from this section of the Bhagavatam that I just wanted to share briefly in this class. That Krishna, the way he responds to Gandhari is very telling and instructive for us. Krishna could have gotten and became defensive. In fact, he could have blamed her, because actually, when we look at it objectively, Gandhari was a big part of this problem, right? Of this issue happening. And actually, he could have said, Gandhari, you're blaming me, but you and Dhritarashtra were, culprits number one for this conflict happening. And in fact, Krishna tried so many times he had gone to Hastinapur. He was speaking to Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra, and he tried, especially his final peace mission, right before the conflict, he tried very, very strongly to not allow the war to happen, to prevent the war. And in fact, when he went, he was actually very much disrespected by Duryodhana and his brothers, particularly Dushashan. And in fact, even more than that, they actually tried to kidnap Krishna. And it's one of my favorite pastimes, gives me, goosebumps. But, they actually try to capture him, and Krishna shows his universal form in the assembly hall in Hastinapur. Very, very rare sighting. And actually, Dhritarashtra is allowed to see that based on his request to Krishna to be able to see Krishna's universal form. But the point here can be that Krishna actually takes this as kind of a sign for the Yadus to, and it was part of his plan for the Yadus to end off their earthly pastimes on this earth and move forward. And we can see that the point there is that we can see that it's easy to kind of judge things in our spiritual life. Both seemingly good and bad events that happen to us have deep value on our spiritual journey, even if they might materially seem very challenging and very hopeless, you could say. They have value from a spiritual angle perspective, because everything is meant for a gradual spiritual evolution in this world. And we can see Krishna, what he actually just smiles when Gandhari curses him and says, Tatastu, may it be so. Right? Again, he could have chose many different ways, because Krishna just accepts it because it's all part of his plan in the Yadus moving on from this planet. Krishna knows that that the earthly pastimes of his are going to be ending, and therefore the Yadu dynasty also should be coming along. And the other point in this purport that's made is that there are kind of different vantage points to look at the whole pastime from. There's sort of like the external reason that we can see, where it's said, in a couple different ways. In the purport, there's one line that says that it appeared that the Yadus were beginning to be indifferent or defiant to the Lord's will, right? And they were becoming puffed up. That's stated as well, right? So there's some things we can learn from that, which we'll talk about briefly. And then there's the internal, which Jiva Goswami mentions, that there's no question of them becoming puffed up and becoming indifferent to the Lord's will, because they're eternal associates of the Lord, right? So we can look at it from both perspectives, really knowing that the internal, it's the pastime of the Lord, but from the external perspective, we can learn some lessons as well. And the second point that I want to make, so the first point was really just around the fact that seemingly good and bad events, at face value, they can seem good or bad, but in our spiritual journey, they can actually be very useful and meaningful and healthy and good for us. So we can see this from the curse of Gandhari, and then the curse of the Brahmanas to the Yadu dynasty, which happens a little bit later in this chapter. And then the second point that I wanted to make was that there's a line in the purport it's stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam that a just king will refuse to punish his own enemy if his enemy is innocent, but will punish his own son if his son actually deserves punishment. And so we can see um, Krishna here in this verse is thinking about how do I remove this burden of my own family, right? And although some may say that the earth's burden is now gone, in my opinion, it is not yet gone because there remains the Yadava dynasty itself, whose strength is unbearable for the earth, from the translation that we just read. Um, and the point that I want to make is that charity begins at home. Very simple point. The charity begins at home. Sometimes we can see here Krishna is focusing. He focused on the demons, right? In his pastimes of Vrindavan and Mathura, and then he focused on some even more demons with Duryodhan and the Kaurava dynasty, right? When as he moves to Dwarka and gets into this relationship with Hastinapur and helping the Pandavas navigate this whole ordeal for so many years. And then now, as Krishna is wrapping up his pastimes, he's also thinking about how do I make sure the earth's burden is eliminated as we move into Kali Yuga. And so sometimes we can also see in our own life that we become so focused on things that don't necessarily matter, um, that we forget to take care of what's important to us. What's charity begins at home. The relationships that are important to us, our family, right? Our kids, our friends, our community. We can become so kind of enamored with some of the bigger things, the bigger goals and visions that we have, right? So we can kind of see that that can be the case there, and that can have disastrous consequences, right? Because as it's said in the purport, although this wouldn't be the case, as Jiva Goswami mentions, the Yadava dynasty was very much in line with the Lord because they're eternal associates of the Lord. But we can see that it's also mentioned that in their sense of separation from the Lord, they could they could be very upset, right? And that can cause a burden for the earth. And we can see how that when charity doesn't begin at home, there can also be issues. But we have an example of kind of two brief examples here that are given. The first is of Dhritarashtra, right? We can see that Dhritarashtra, um, he when it's interesting when Duryodhana was born, there were so many ill omens or negative omens that were there. The jackals were howling, and so many negative things were what that came about. Even his birth in itself was inauspicious in so many ways, the way that he was made. Um, and actually, Vidura and different wise men had come to Dhritarashtra and mentioned that you should actually abandon this boy because he will create severe destruction. And there's so many signs of that inauspiciousness. But out of affection, Dhritarashtra couldn't, he's very attached to Duryodhana. He couldn't do so, couldn't abandon him. And therefore, this whole conflict occurs, right? As Duryodhana gets older, becomes more independent, really becomes out of the grasp of Dhritarashtra to be able to control. And we can see that play out in the entire Mahabharata. Then we see another example of King Bharat, which is actually India is named Bharatvarsha, which was actually the whole world at one point. It's explained. But we see how King Bharat, who was actually one of the forefathers of the Kuru dynasty, he actually also had some sons, and there's different stories and kind of versions of it in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavatam as well. And his sons were, it's said that they either quite cruel or they didn't have any kind of qualification to lead. And in this case, they were actually killed because he felt like his sons were not able to take over in the right way, in a dharmic way. And so we can see kind of two examples of being able to um, kind of maybe extreme examples, if you will, but that really charity begins at home, and that we have to start with really looking at the relationships around us and how we're playing within them. And we can also see this in the example of Vidura and Bhishma as well, where kind of my third point here is that um, real well-wishers are honest and they say and do the needful. Real well-wishers are honest and they say and do the needful. Um, Genuine kind of correction and honesty over blind flattery. Right? That needs to be there. Um, where we can see that in the example of Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, because he's so attached to his son, um, and there's times where Dhritarashtra does try to, correct Duryodhana. By and large, he's very passive, right? He's very passive, and he's almost in a lot of ways encouraging to Duryodhana to kind of do his evil mechanics. Versus we look at Vidura and we look at, even Bhishma, they're very much giving throughout the entire Mahabharata, they're giving so much feedback, giving so much constructive criticism of this is not right. What we're doing is not right as a core of a dynasty, but it's falling on deaf ears, right? But they're doing their job. And so it's important that we are seeing also in our life where are we getting that correction from, right? Where are we getting um, feedback from? Not just that we're getting encouragement and praise and everything that we're doing is great. Real well-wishers are honest and they say and do the needful, just like Krishna is thinking. He's a real well-wisher of the Yalu dynasty. And so therefore, he's arranging for these things to happen, which can seem from the outside quite drastic and maybe pessimistic or negative, that there's going to be this fratricidal conflict within them, just like the Kauravas had, but actually it's for their benefit. And then the fourth point that I wanted to make was that in the purport, it's mentioned that Lord Krishna detected by their intimate association with him, some members of the Yalu dynasty had become indifferent to his will. Of course, as we just mentioned, there's no real question, as Jiva Goswami mentions earlier later in the purport, that they're eternal associates of the Lord. There's no question of them being indifferent to his will. We can see the internal and external here. And there's something that we can learn from this line, though, that our association doesn't necessarily make us special or better than others. Sometimes there's a natural proclivity to becoming puffed up or having some false pride, which we all have in our heart, when we're associated with greatness or with the Lord or with the Lord's devotees. Right? We can see the Yadus here externally are appearing to become puffed up or indifferent to the Lord's will. Actually, not the case, but we can see that, we can learn from that. Sometimes we think, that because our guru is great or because Srila Prabhupada is so great, that we're great as well because of our association being part of their society. That's actually not the case, right? We want to make sure that yes, we're following in the footsteps of very special souls, but that doesn't mean that we're the exception or that we're a bit better than others in any way, shape, or form. So that false pride should be guarded against very much in our heart, even if we're associated with great personalities, because that false pride can be actually part of the downfall, which we'll see more in this chapter as we go through how the Yadu dynasty comes apart. And this false pride externally, we'll see, has a lot to do with it. So we have to very much be careful in our spiritual life that we don't allow this envy, this greed, false ego, false pride to creep through in our heart and take root, and then also affect our interactions and relationships with the devotees. And I see this being an issue both in my life and then also in our societies. We can see that it can be an issue. And then the last point I want to make before we kind of open it up as well for questions, comments, and thoughts, is that internal discord is actually more dangerous than external discord. Internal is more dangerous than external. We see here that Krishna is thinking, and he'll talk about it more in the next verse. I won't go too far ahead. That no one can defeat the Yadavas. They're so powerful, right? They're the Lord's family, and Lord's army. That the Lord is thinking that let me create an internal quarrel, because an external force cannot beat them, cannot destroy them. So let me do that to rid the earth of its burden. And we can see the same thing can be the case in our own families, our own movement, our own societies. It's said, I was able to find the exact quote of it, but I've heard it many times. We quoted that Srila Prabhupada has mentioned that really the thing that we need to be mindful of is not necessarily external discord, but internal discord within our movement, within our communities and societies. That ISKCON can be hurt and destroyed from within, if anything, right? And so we have to be very much mindful of this, that actually sometimes external forces, when they give us stress, it's actually easier for the internal group to coalesce and be inspired to respond together in a sense of cooperation, versus internally when there becomes factions, when there becomes bitterness, when there becomes envy, when there becomes gossip and fault finding. Of course, there's constructive criticism and constructive feedback that needs to be there, but when it's done in a way that the intention becomes spoiled, when it becomes overrun with negative sentiment and bitterness toward each other, that's a very dangerous place to be. And especially as the Krishna consciousness movement grows bigger and bigger by the day in so many beautiful ways, there's more and more we have to be kind of guarding against these anarthas and this behavior and this mindset creeping within ourselves. And Srila Prabhupada mentioned that one of his last instructions was that you will really show me your love by how you cooperate with each other. It's really the sign of love that we love Srila Prabhupada, that we try to cooperate with each other and put down our false egos and humble ourselves to try to really have proper Vaishnava relationships, etiquette. And we look at this from a kind of a spiritual angle. We can look at it from a material angle. These are also principles that work in this world as well. I was just thinking kind of this internal external discord. Even in this country, I was born and raised in the US, and I think we have people from all over the world on this call. But sometimes it feels like you see kind of politically, right? There's so much division or so many different opinions on different things. And I was just very, very briefly reflecting as I was getting ready for our class that I was, it's September 30th, and just a few weeks ago, it was September 11th, which was a very meaningful day in New York, a very, dark day, if you will, from a material perspective, and the loss of life, and the 9/11 attacks and whatnot. And I was thinking that actually, in some ways, it was beautiful to see, although there was so much. I remember being a kid. I was 10, 11 years old at that time. And, my father worked in the city. It was a very, very kind of scary time for many people. But I was just thinking briefly that, while it was very challenging, because there was an external force kind of attacking, there was a lot of unity also that we could see in the world, in our society. Strangers were helping each other. People were checking in on each other. People were caring about each other. There was a sense of community, of camaraderie, of I have your back, that we're part of one family, we're part of one nation. But then as soon as that, external pressure seemingly goes away, then we go back to taking each other for granted, right? Very much so. So we can see that it's present in our spiritual society, this kind of potential or threat of internal discord. being actually very much more significant of a risk than external, and then also in the material world. This is part of human psychology, and we have to guard against it very carefully. So anyway, I wanted to end off there and leave some time for some questions and comments. But I wanted to kind of just summarize the five main kind of points that I made here. We talked about the curse of Gandhari and how that started the kind of end of the Yadu dynasty when she cursed Krishna to kind of meet the same fate as the Kauravas did after the Mahabharata war in Kurukshetra after that. And the point really there was that both seemingly good and bad events have deep value on a spiritual level for us. We can see that Krishna did not get defensive or did not blame her, which could very rightfully do that because Dhritarashtra and Gandhari were a big part of why the conflict actually happened and came to the level it did. But he took it as a sign and as part of his pastimes to kind of wind down his pastimes, of course. So we can kind of learn from that. The second point we talked about was really charity beginning at home. That's an important part. Sometimes we focus on so many other things besides the things that are right in front of us that really need our attention. That's an important point there. The third point that I made was that real well-wishers are honest and say and do the needful. Talked about the example of Vidura as well as Bhishma in the Kaurava dynasty, and how Krishna was obviously, of course, always a well-wisher of the Yadus. And then kind of the fourth point, talking about how the Yadus externally became puffed up because of their association with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And, that point there was that our association, just because we're associated with great personalities, doesn't make us, better than others or special or great in any way, shape, or form. And then point number 5 was that internal discord is more dangerous than external discord. And we can see that how Krishna creates the internal discord, and we're starting to see the seeds of that here in this verse. And going into this chapter, we'll see more of that to help the Yadus wrap up their pastimes on this earthly planet. So I want to thank everyone for your time and your attention. And I see there's a lot of hands already. Thank you so much, Haribol.
Thank you, Anuj Prabhu. Min, followed by Mathuranath Prabhu.
Thank you so much for such a great class. I wanted to ask about if you could kind of move this notion of internal conflict being more dangerous than the exterior one. And you spoke about this in context of the fratricidal war and our modern day craziness. But if you could kind of move that into ourselves, within us, the internal conflict potentially being more dangerous than the exterior life that we could lead. And because when we hear the Bhagavad Gita, we could sort of understand or receive the war in Kurukshetra as our situation that we find ourselves in individuals' lives as well. So if you could kind of make that connection for us, and what is the best way sort of to perceive that conflict within us for the betterment of our growth of our spiritual practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, a couple points or thoughts that come to my mind and heart is that often we're looking for peace externally, but there's a point that's mentioned across different traditions of the world that we can't hope for external peace or world peace if we can't find peace within. And that point of internal peace or kind of internal cleanliness, cleaning the mirror of the heart and mind, is the very essence of our spiritual journey, actually. Because we're inherently spiritual beings, and we've also disconnected from who we are for such a long time that that's actually the root of kind of all the external conflicts that occur. Naturally, kind of connecting it to Kurukshetra, like life is a battlefield in many ways, and that's why the Gita is spoken on the battlefield. Krishna is speaking not in sort of a mountaintop or in a very kind of serene scenic place or serene place. Um, it's meant to we're practicing the principles of yoga, of bhakti yoga in challenging situations. And when we're provoked, when we're dealing with people at work, when we're dealing with the world, we're dealing with conflict in our family, our relationships, our friendships, whatever the case might be. So there's a lot there, but I hope that makes a little bit of that connection. Um, but that we have to be very mindful of the internal dialogue, the internal cleanliness of our heart and mind. And then as we go forward into the world, then we can deal with people with more of a grounding and a connection to the principles of Dharma that Krishna shares in the Bhagavad Gita. Does that help?
Yes, yes, thank you very much.
Of course. I see a few more hands. Mathura?
Yeah, hi, Bo.
Yes.
Thank you. Really beautiful points you're making. And Min, I was really same kind of right there with you. That's similar topic. And I was thinking, yeah, in order to get along with our internal people, our family, our community, if there's an internal war that's not being dealt with within that each person, then they're going to be projecting their internal issues onto the people closest to them. So then the war, instead of actually getting along, there's going to be a war with the people closest to us. And the triggers that are happening, so the people closest to us are going to trigger us. And I was just thinking that the triggers, a lot of the time we want to distract ourselves from what's triggering us. But the triggers are the things that are showing us what we get to work on. What we, it's Krishna going, hey, here's your opportunity to progress. And just little things, so much of the time we overlook. Here's my opportunity to come closer. Um, I'm feeling I'm feeling disturbed. I have a headache. What's this headache around? Or I'm feeling triggered around this person. Instead of going and distracting ourselves, really deeply looking at that, praying about that. These little things are indications how we can deal with our internal war. Yeah, and anything else you have to say, Prabhu, about that? Just also wanted to bring up
Yeah.
this subject.
It's such a great point. And by the way, once darshan opens up, we'll take a pause from any conversation. We'll take darshan of the deities, and then we can come back to our discussion and other hands that are also up. So thank you for your patience on that. But yeah, it's so important. I think such great points. Even in the stages of bhakti, there's different stages from Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, and then Anartha Nivritti, right? And then going on and going forward. And those are all detailed. But Anartha Nivritti is also a very important part of the spiritual process in giving up unwanted attachment and desires. So darshan is opening up. So we'll just pause here and resume once in a few minutes.
Jai Shri Shivana Mulidor. With Adipusha facilitating the darshan, you never know. But he's doing his best. Okay, Anuj Prabhu, back to you, please. Anartha Niviti.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yeah, so we're making that point, and I love the point that you're making about triggers and projection because I think it's an important, really important point, honestly speaking, if I could be very frank, especially in our devotee communities. Um, even in the secular world, it's talked about kind of having good emotional and mental hygiene, right? And we want to go a step further than that, like spiritual hygiene, right? But um, being able to look at the emotions that we're feeling when we are in interactions with different devotees, and instead of blaming other people and fault finding them, which there is a time for constructive, feedback, if you will, if you're in the right relationship with someone, we should be looking within more, and seeing what is, like you said, what is it bringing up within us, and actually we'll find there's a lot of dust on the mirror of the mind and heart, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, that needs attention. At least I found that in my life. So, it definitely is such a good point. And when we can have that focus on ourselves, not in a selfish way, but in a self-improvement way, then actually we can have such great relationships with others, because we're going to be less kind of intention or friction projecting our anarthas and different insecurities and different experiences that we've had. Just like if we're wearing rose-colored glasses, everything we see is rose, right? And so sometimes when we're actually dealing with a lot of envy, we see it everyone else. We think everyone else is being so envious, and so many faults we're finding, but actually it's our insecurity that we're seeing. So it's so important. Yeah, it's a great point to start with ourselves.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, something else I'm just thinking around this point is
Yeah.
when we don't deal with these internal conflicts, sometimes we're pushing down, we're also depressing, we're pushing the anxiety, the stress, the anger, the hurt, the pain, we're pushing it, so we depress it, and when we depress it, we get depressed. And you see a lot of people, we may be trying to act devotional, we may be trying to act in very, elevated ways, but maybe inside there's depression. I know myself, I realize, oh, I haven't been like fully alive and fully self-expressed. And because I'm not dealing with some internal conflict, there's things I'm not actually addressing in my life.
Mhm.
And there's a story around that. There's a family, they were building a house here in Alachua, and she posted something online. She said, we've gone through so much struggle and difficulty building this house. It's been such a journey, and my husband has never once said one complaint or upset about the whole process. And I thought, oh, this doesn't seem actually healthy. This seems maybe unbalanced. I'm
Mhm.
actually worried about him. And then 2 weeks later, or a month later, she posted, my husband is dying of stage 4 cancer. We had no idea he had cancer, and he died within another couple weeks or a month because he wasn't actually, he was pushing down all of his frustration and anger and upset around going through such a difficult situation that they were going through. And that can turn into disease in our body as well if we're not careful to really deal with these things.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's really kind of trapped emotions become very much issues in the body. Yeah, it's so important to express them, but also to express them in a healthy and appropriate way, like you said, in the right setting, with the right people, right forum. In a safe space is also,
Yes.
that's also another important point. Sometimes, sometimes, like you said, they either become kind of suppressed and we don't share them, or they come out in very weird ways, right? We can see that kind of
Yes.
inappropriate ways where if anger, like even, even expressing anger, there's a healthy way to express anger. And when you share it as a need and you share it in a safe way, it can actually be quite freeing too. So yeah, all great points. And in the chat, I see a really nice thought by Mitravinda Prabhu, who's saying that Bhakti Yoga is a yoga of emotions. It's not spoken about enough. Yeah, it's a great point.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. Did you want to share, Mitravinda Prabhu? I know you had your hand up.
Hare Krishna, yes, I just wanted to say how grateful I am to be able to come into your class today or your sharing today, and how wonderfully you have shared these aspects of health, spirituality, community, and forward momentum for the betterment of the world. Uh, this, what I wrote regarding Bhakti Yoga being the yoga of emotion is often not spoken of. And today you did it very intelligently, but with great reward for everyone who is going to hear this later on and for who's in this room. Too often, and this is not a criticism, it's an observation. Too often, we in our communities are accoladed for being strong in the sense of, moving through, getting it done, um, uh, making things happen, in other words,
Yeah.
and without cueing or realizing that sometimes people are moving forward in a way to hide their pain, to hide emotions, and sometimes, and many times, people come to spiritual communities because they are in pain or that they're fearful. There's so many ways to come to Krishna consciousness, as we know. But when we come and we get occupied and do busyness instead of deep understanding of the process, then we hide behind um, service. And then we have to question, is it service if we are harming others, yet getting things done for Krishna, considering aparad and what aparad means against Radharani, and that everyone has Krishna within. So if we hurt others, whether we think it's our right to or not, outside of protecting women and children and communities, how can we actually be doing service? More authentic communication on these issues is necessary in order to keep and honor Srila Prabhupada's service of ISKCON, and to have it be super shiny and have everyone benefit authentically. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those kind words. First off, anything I'm sharing is from my teachers and people that have invested and inspired me. So I'm happy to be able to share that. People that have changed my life, honestly, and there's still so much work I need to be doing. So, but I appreciate that, and so I want to give that credit there. And what you shared with um, hurting, serving, and then hurting others. I think it's a very honest dialogue, and I think it's an important one in our societies and our movements, because sometimes we can become so fixated on our service, on thinking on thinking that what we're doing is pleasing Krishna and Srila Prabhupada, and we have to also realize that the relationships that and the way we affect other devotees is also an incredibly important part, if not more important than our actual service, on how we're serving Guru and Krishna at the same time. And so, yeah, it's an important point of reflection. And if we see that we're going off course, because all of us do, none of us are perfect. We've all hurt someone, we've all hurt ourselves, we've all made offenses and mistakes. That part is normal, but the part that we have to be very strict about and mindful about and sensitive about is pausing there and then reflecting on how we've been part of the problem and what we can do to rectify our behavior and take actions to be better going forward. So we're imperfect, and we want to create a space for that and compassion for that, but also it's important that we're proactive on that too. So great point. Thank you for that. We have some questions as well, and then we had a hand as well. So Anand Bihari Prabhu, how should I? You can just throw some questions in chat.
The hand. It's Bima's hand.
Yes.
Hand goes. Bima Prabhu,
Okay.
please.
Bima Prabhu.
Haribo Prabhu. Thank you for addressing this pastime on all different levels. I am reminded of, and I'm reading this, of course, Shakespeare's Hamlet. When Hamlet, facing a sea of troubles, wrote or spoke, "Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them." So we find in, excuse me, I just had to run to take care of some animal business. Anyways, this whole thing, the sea of troubles, is like Kurukshetra. And with Krishna in his chariot, Arjuna had to come to this point where he knew slings and arrows were going to be coming his way, coming by way of his brothers, coming by way of his son, right? So he had a sea of troubles. And as Maturnath is repeatedly drumming in that we must rise up with Krishna and face these sea of troubles. And by virtue of Krishna's reassuring words, and even how he began it all with a smile, right? Arjun, like Gandiva Bo, just he's just imagine yourself in a fratricidal war for real, right? And you're in the middle of it, and you're here to make a decision whether you're going to engage or not. So that's what we have. And I think that it calls for courage to take the time to go within, because that's where the real war is within us. I mean, look at Prabhupada. At some point back in time, or maybe he's a Nityasiddha, but at some point he had to face a sea of troubles, and he came to the point whereby his faith was 100%. And as an old frail man with 2 heart attacks under his belt, he came to New York City. And talk about, like, they say when Bhima goes through a phalanx, he swings his mace, and like on those video games, soldiers are falling as if they were flies under a fly swatter. And so Prabhupada came and did that for us. He came and he took arms externally against these foibles and these slings and arrows that material nature throws at us. So thank you very much. It's very inspiring to hear something ancient, deep, true, and applicable to our everyday life. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Very well. Thank you. And I just want to add very briefly that I was recently in Boston for Prabhupada's 60th anniversary celebration of when he came to the Boston Harbor, and talked about Prabhupada coming and the 2 heart attacks. And, we took a little trip just in the harbor on a boat and doing kirtan, part of the festivities for the weekend. And, really being there, I could really just, like, you have just a little bit more, 10% more appreciation for how challenging the journey was for Srila Prabhupada, and how much he went through. Even just we were on the water for like a couple hours, and devotees were getting a little headaches and some seasickness and whatnot. And Prabhupada was traveling the ocean for over 30 days. and not in a nice cruise ship, but in a freight ship, not even really meant for human beings, right? Meant for freight. And so we can see, anyway, just very brief, I can talk more about that incredible experience, but I wanted to share that my appreciation went higher, much higher, just by being in Boston and seeing what it must have been like, and just getting a small glimpse of that when Prabhupada came 60 years back.
Thank you, Anuj Prabhu and Bhima Prabhu. The question from Sadhvi. There's a question from Sadhvi Devi. Sadhvi, are you here? Sadhvi is here. Sadhvi, Anuj Prabhu, you have some time to address Sadhvi's question?
Yes. So I'm just reading it out loud. So when you say charity begins at home, let's say there is a young person who have started to learn about Krishna consciousness, but the parents are not, or women have just started learning about Krishna consciousness, but no one else in the family are. Do we get to neglect family's need because we have learned some things about the reality of our existence? I think I'm understanding the question fully. So it sounds like you were saying that coming to Krishna consciousness, but the family is not per se, and so there's kind of going on different paths, if you will, so to speak, as at this point, where you're becoming maybe perhaps more devotional and that focusing on that life, but your family may not understand what you're doing, or maybe they're critical perhaps of that. Is that correct, Sadhvi Prabhu? See here. Okay, yes. Okay. Yeah, that's a important point and issue. It's also a complex one that I think that it does require some kind of guidance one-on-one with someone that you're speaking to who's a mature devotee, experienced devotee, to kind of understand, because some of these things are contextual and they're a little complex, right? Like dealing with family matters. It's not so easy to kind of just generalize and be generic about it based off knowing the exact situation. So that's just kind of point number one there. I would say that is definitely a common issue, especially for people that are coming into a spiritual path that's very different from what their family practices or what they're were taught growing up. And sometimes parents or family can be kind of alarmed with the change or different things of that nature. When you say family needs or neglecting family needs, I'm not sure what that exactly means. But I think the best thing that I would say that you can do from what I've seen is be the best devotee and bhakti yogi and spiritualist that you can be, and still show your family the utmost respect, love, and grace, even if they're sometimes critical. And if you have to if they're too critical, then you might have to draw some boundaries and maybe take some physical space from them. Sometimes these changes can be a lot for people. Like change is difficult. And sometimes changing can be, especially parents and close family. Sometimes they kind of think they have a little bit of a right to say something or be concerned. Even if it's a positive change, change can be hard for people around us. So giving them some time, some grace is good. Maybe where appropriate, giving them a little bit of an understanding of what you're doing. But I personally find the biggest thing is our character, our values, our practices, sadhana, that when people see that we're genuine, that we're sincere, we're serious, and that we also have the right sadachar, right character, right etiquette in relationship and our behavior, and they see that we're developing good qualities, that they actually start to become inspired. There's so many examples of I'm very much inspired by ISKCON Chowpatty and the brahmacharis that come from there in Mumbai, India, ISKCON Chowpatty. And a lot of the brahmacharis have shared different stories with me and publicly of when they joined the ashram to become full-time monks. Their parents were like very shocked because they were coming from families where often they're like the only son or the only child. And especially in traditional families, it's kind of like, okay, this child is passing on my legacy, right? Like I want them to get married and have children and have a nice job and a career. But then they became a monk, right? And are full-time focused in their whole life on that. And in many cases, some of the parents were very challenging, very critical, very, hurt by this change. But then over time, when they saw the character, when they saw the beautiful growth of their child, who's now obviously not an adult, but how they grew spiritually, they also became devotees themselves, or at the very least, they became very favorable and inspired by the path of bhakti. So that would be my thought. I hope that answers your question. I know it's a complex one. Again, it's kind of the nuances have to be discussed more confidentially and with someone, in a safe kind of setting, and someone who's mature as well can kind of understand these dynamics. But I would say the biggest thing you can do is continue to do what you're doing and bring the essence of that in your interactions of bhakti yoga, in your interactions with your family, and let that also transform them over time. It may not be 1 month, 2 months, might take a year, 2, 5, 10 years. It depends on different people, but people will see how it's changing you for the better. Thank you.
Anuj Prabhu, should Sadhvi Devi tell them that she loves them?
Yeah, of course. That's healthy. That's very healthy.
That's what they want to know, really.
It is amazing that when we meet somebody like Prabhupada, sorry, I'm just exercising, believe it or not. I've got to drive across the country, so I'm trying to wake myself up. It is amazing that the acharyas and the devotees to whom we hold admiration, to the extent in which they possess the qualities, the 26 qualities of a devotee. Prabhu, simple for the simple. Those 26 qualities, we should reflect on them on a consistent basis, and then we will get like a barometer of where we're at in regards to our true consciousness. It's been brought up, the inner work, and we see that if the inner work is done, then those 26 qualities start to shine through bit by bit. Could you elaborate on that, Prabhu?
Yes, yeah. No, it's a great point. Those qualities are part of our natural growth, and we talked about the stage of anartha nirvritti. That's also an important. The first 4 stages are really important on the path of bhakti, and kind of clearing anarthas, unwanted desires in the heart, and naturally these good qualities start to take a firm hold. And Prabhupada's also mentioned it kind of in a simple way, where I think a journalist one time asked Prabhupada, "How do I recognize a devotee of yours?" And he said there will be a perfect gentleman, and gentle, perfect Vaishnava and Vaishnavi, like that. We can see kind of the character of a devotee based off their dealings and behavior, and that's why we're focusing so much on that. And so many points from so many of the devotees in this room and in this class were focused on Vaishnava etiquette, Vaishnava qualities, and focusing on creating the right sadhana and sadachar. We'll see those qualities, right? Being kind to everyone, being mild, being clean, being equal to others. There's so many different things that we can learn that are there. So being content with what we have. So there's so many good qualities that occur. So we can, yeah, and like you said, we can judge ourselves. We can go through that list and see, are we actually living these qualities? And I think in the 13th chapter as well, the Gita, the first section of that chapter, Krishna gives qualities of someone who's a yogi, or who's like an evolved spiritual being, or on the path. And the first quality he mentions is humility. And there's so many other qualities, from compassion, contentment, all those things, freedom from envy. So it's all listed there, and we can look at that and say, how much are we actually practicing this? And if we're all probably kind of frank, I know I can speak for myself. There's definitely a lot more to to work on, certainly. So that gives us our roadmap.
Thank you, Bhima Prabhu, Anuj Prabhu. Can we take one more contributor, Anuj Prabhu?
Sure. I'm your obedient servant here. And did anyone else want to share? I think there's no more questions in chat.
There was one spiritual being that hasn't spoken yet. Krishna Mobile, Adipurusha Prabhu, Angel,
Oh, yes.
like to speak? Unmute Adipurusha Prabhu.
It's a little awkward, we're driving, but wonderful class, wonderful discussion. Krishna arranges these stories, and there's so many ways we can milk out information and understanding of how to serve Krishna by listening to them. And I mean, there's a dozen different things we could comment about. One thing was that idea of like charity begins at home, which is very valid. We have to apply it right where we are. It's not just in a book. And the interesting thing is, like, if you're going down the road, you can fall off the right side of the road or you can fall off the left side of the road. You can apply this correctly, or you can overdo it one way or the other. For example, one thing I heard recently, Rasanath Prabhu was saying, there's two philosophies: surrender to Krishna or don't surrender to Krishna. Right? That makes sense, right? So Krishna says, Sarva Dharma Parityagya. Abandon all these other dharmas, because all of them are compromised. For example, Duryodhana, he had the dharma of a father, so charity begins at home, so I have to please my son. But his son was misdirected. So he, in the light of trying to please his son, he went against Krishna, and the whole thing was, a complete catastrophe for the whole family. So we want to do what we can to maintain the family and their needs. But on the other hand, we have to be careful not to make that dharma more prominent than Sarva Dharma, than what Krishna is asking us to do. And the analogy is given, for peacefulness. If there's a pond of water and we throw stones here and there, each stone will create a series of ripples going out. And if the stones are scattered all over the pond, then when the ripples come out, they'll be bouncing off each other. But if all the stones are dropped in the same place, then all the ripples will be concentric and it'll be harmonious. So the idea is putting Krishna as the center. And we hopefully are encouraging and caring and providing access for our family members or people in our inner circle to come closer to Krishna. And if we're in a family that's inimical or is not yet quite on the level we're on, I remember my mother was very uncomfortable and critical about the idea of taking to devotional service. And it was a little awkward. So we prayed and we listened to Prabhupada. And my mother would say, I'm losing my son, I'm losing my son. I would say, Mom, you're not losing a son. Just like in the Italian family, they say you're not losing a son, you're gaining a daughter when you get married, right? You've heard that? You're not losing a son, So I said, you're not losing a son, you're gaining the whole Hare Krishna movement as part of the family. Which she thought was ridiculous, but she laughed. And I said, the main thing is, Mama, I love you. So that's what the family really wants to know. They want to know if you love them. So whatever else you might preach about, and whatever their doubts are, they're just interested to know if you love them. And Krishna will help us through these awkward situations. Anyway, I'm not sure if that was much of a contribution, but I prayed to Prabhupada what to say, and that's what he gave me.
Prabhu, your mother did great devotional service. She had you, my God, she had you, and then she tolerated you.
That's true.
You tell me you've done anything like that. That's
Well,
huge.
thank you very
But for
much.
your mother, you wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have a means by which I could engage in 24/7 devotional service. Krishna gave the plate, and you brought it over. And so your mother did great devotional service. And there's lots of people lining up to learn what it is to be hospitable and to open up your home, open up your business to the hearts and souls, and by covert measures get them in the association of prasadam and devotees. Your mother did unbelievable service, Prabhu.
Where would
Always remember that.
we be without Prabhupada's mother, right?
Uh,
Hare Krishna. Okay, thank you. I'll go to Sri Prabhupada.
Thank you, Haripusha Prabhu. Anuj Prabhu, please. Final remarks, instructions.
And oh, so many wonderful things were said. I was actually, if I could share, I probably we should probably end, but it's such a nice discussion. But I was just thinking to glorify Ayendra Prabhu was one of my mentors, and just always I think of him very often. And when you were talking about doing the needful and showing our family members we love them, I was just thinking of a brief story that he shared in with Satyaraj Prabhu in one of the interviews, where he was in Vrindavan and he had long kind of detached from his family or speaking to his family, and he got a letter, I think, from in the mail from his brother, who mentioned that his father, and his father was passing away, like really close to his passing away, on his deathbed, and he kind of threw the letter in the wastebasket, and he said, I'm doing what I need to be doing from a spiritual perspective, and if I am successful and continue forward, that everyone will benefit, my family, including my father. And then that night he went to sleep, and he actually had a dream where kind of this angelic presence came to him, definitely some celestial being, and said, "Hey, why did you throw the letter in the wastebasket? Why are you thinking that, that you're kind of just kind of ignoring this request, to kind of take care of your father? Do you know that, kind of who your father was?" And he kind of shared that some backstory that, interestingly enough, his father was a kind of a fallen disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. It's a very interesting story. Anyway, point is that he said then he woke up from the dream, and kind of the presence had said to him in the dream that you should make sure that everything is taken care of for him, and do the needful. And so he got up and he kind of was shaken up by this dream, and so he had read that even if kind of a single piece of tulsi is in the fire of someone who is departing in the cremation fire, that soul is liberated effectively. And so he basically kind of just, I think someone was going back from Vrindavan to the States, and so he just sent a piece of tulsi with them. And he was thinking that, actually my family they're American and they're Christian family, so they're not going to cremate, they're going to bury the body. So why am I even doing this? But I'll do it because, doing the needful. And actually he got a letter back from his brother that said that father passed away, and that when he passed away, before he passed away, they asked him, how do you want your last rites to occur? Because they were Christian. And he said that his father said, I want my body to be cremated. And according to the instructions of, kind of Ayendra Prabhu, and so then, they put the tulsi in the cremation as well. So we can see that we're on the spiritual path, even though we kind of might deviate from what our family's norms are. There's still ways that we can still be connected and still serve them. And we shouldn't think that, yeah, we're better than them, or that they need us and we don't need them anymore. We can see how can we assist them in small ways to help them on their journey as well. And we can kind of see that from the example of Ayendra Prabhu, just sending tulsi for his father who was passing away, was part of his mission. And so he was able to do that. Anyway, long story to end off, but I know we went quite long today, but I want to thank everyone for just the interaction, the engagement, just all the thoughts and insights and wisdom and heartfelt realizations on the call. I personally feel like I'm learning from all of you as well, too, and hearing more of what's important in our Vaishnava communities and where we need to emphasize more of, going forward. So thank you for sharing so much. And Anand Bihar Prabhu, thanks for always creating the space for us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuj Prabhu. I see the devotees are very, very satisfied by the quality of class and discussion. Thank you. We're going to request Mathurnath Prabhu to recite the Maha Mantra. Recite like you're connected to your true self, Mathurnath Prabhu, like you always do.
Okay, let's do it.
Dude, that was harsh.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Good. We could sense that connection that Mathurnath Prabhu has with Krishna and his self. Thank you very much. Anuj Prabhu ki jai, Ayendra Prabhu ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Hare Krishna, everybody on this call ki jai.